My name is Emily Carter. I am 30 years old, and I work as a project coordinator at a mid-sized corporate consulting firm in Chicago. I have always been the reliable one, the woman who stayed late, skipped lunches, and never once complained. That was who I was. That was who I had trained myself to be. The morning I found out my mother died, I was at my desk when my sister Diane called. I stepped into the hallway to take it. My hand was shaking by the time I hung up. I stood there a moment with my back against the cold wall, just trying to breathe. Then I walked into my boss's office. His name was Mr. Colton. He was 51, always wore the same dark gray blazer, and had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were already behind on something. I told him what had happened. I told him I needed to go home for the funeral. He didn't look up from his screen. "We have the Harwick report due Friday," he said. "If you miss work for this, don't come back." I stood there frozen. Then, without missing a beat, he added, "And I'd suggest keeping the personal business off this floor." The clock on his wall ticked once. I said, quietly, "Understood." I walked back to my desk and sat down. My chair felt harder than usual. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed the way they always did. But today, the sound felt like it was inside my head. I opened my email and started typing responses to clients. My fingers moved on their own. My phone was face down on the desk. I could feel it vibrating every few minutes. Condolences from cousins, from old friends, from neighbors back home in Ohio. I didn't turn it over. Not once. Mr. Colton had a glass wall on the side of his office that faced the open floor. I could see him from my seat. He was on a call, laughing at something. His coffee was steaming. His world had not changed by a single degree. Mine had collapsed completely. I thought about my mother, the way she left voicemails instead of texts, because she said she wanted me to hear her voice. I had 3 unplayed ones saved on my phone. I hadn't been able to listen to them yet. I kept working. I answered 12 more emails before lunch. I did not cry. I did not leave my desk. Not one person on that floor knew what had just happened. That was how Mr. Colton ran things. I had been at this firm for 4 years. I came in as a junior coordinator, straight out of graduate school. Eager, wide-eyed, believing hard work would always be noticed. In my first year, I stayed late every Thursday without being asked. In my second year, I canceled a Christmas trip home because Mr. Colton said the Henderson client needed attention. I told myself it was fine, that I was building something. By my third year, I had stopped making plans outside of work. Not because I was told to, but because I had learned the pattern. If I made plans, they got canceled. It was easier to stop promising things altogether. I missed my cousin's graduation. I missed my best friend Pauline's birthday dinner 2 years in a row. I missed my mother's last birthday, and she had laughed it off on the phone and said there would be other ones. There weren't. I sat at my desk that afternoon and thought about every hour I had poured into that building. The reports, the late nights, the weekends given away without complaint. Then I thought about what Mr. Colton had said that morning. And a smaller, harder thought followed, one I had been pushing back for years. He had always counted on me being too afraid to say no. Not anymore. Diane called again at 7 that evening. I was still at my desk. The office had emptied out, but I had stayed because leaving felt impossible. Like if I stepped outside that building, I would have to feel everything I had been holding at arm's length all day. I finally answered. "Emily?" Her voice broke on the single syllable. She'd been crying for hours. I could hear it. "Please tell me you're coming home." I stared at the report on my screen. "I'm figuring things out," I said. "It's Mom." Her voice dropped. "The service is Friday. Everyone is asking for you." I closed my eyes. I could picture the house, the kitchen with the yellow curtains, the driveway where my mother always stood waving until the car disappeared around the corner. She waited until she couldn't see us anymore. Every single time. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She wrote you something, Emily, before she got too sick. She left it in the kitchen drawer. I haven't opened it." I pressed my lips together hard. "I'll be there," I said. After I hung up, I sat very still. Diane said she hadn't opened it. I didn't let myself think too hard about what my mother might have written. I had already started forming a different kind of plan. The funeral was on Friday. It was now Tuesday evening. I had 3 days. I pulled up my email archive first. I had years of messages from Mr. Colton, instructions, feedback, and more than a few responses that crossed lines a manager had no business crossing. I created a new folder and moved every relevant one into it. Threats disguised as feedback. Orders that overrode my approved personal time. Messages where he had told me directly to push through situations any reasonable manager would have handled differently. Then I opened our internal messaging workspace and scrolled back through months of threads. Messages where he had pressured team members publicly. Messages that dismissed personal circumstances in front of clients. And several directed at me. I saved everything. Then I pulled my timesheets. 4 years of them. I had logged every hour. There were weeks where I had worked over 60 hours and received nothing but a cold reply saying my output wasn't fast enough. I didn't feel angry as I worked through the files. I felt calm. The kind of calm that arrives after a long decision has already quietly been made. By midnight, I had a folder with over 70 saved documents. I was not packing for Ohio. I was building a case. And I had 3 days to make it airtight. Friday morning arrived, gray and still. I woke at 5:30, showered, and stood in front of my closet for a long moment. Then I reached past the business blazers and pulled out my black dress, the one I had bought for a friend's memorial 2 years ago, the one I had never worn to work before. I put it on. I wore my plain black flats. I did not layer a blazer over it. I let it be exactly what it was. When I walked into the office at 7:58, people looked up. I saw it happen across the floor, the slow turning of heads, the pause in conversation, the quiet that spread behind me like a wave. Mr. Colton was standing near the printer when I came in. He watched me walk past. I did not look at him directly, but I could feel his expression. I had learned to read him the way you learn to read weather, not from what he said, but from the silences he chose. He was smiling. Not warmly, the way a man smiles when he believes he has just proven something. He thought I had made a choice. He was right. He just had absolutely no idea what choice I had actually made. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started my morning. I worked all morning without any variation from my normal routine. I answered emails within minutes. I updated the Harwick report that Mr. Colton had used as leverage to keep me in the building. I attended the 9 o'clock check-in, took my usual seat, and made notes. I said nothing that wasn't asked of me. But the whole time, I was doing something else. I had a second document open in a minimized window, a private, time-stamped log. Every time Mr. Colton sent an instruction that contradicted company policy, I noted the time and his exact words. Every time he made a comment about performance in a way that felt more like pressure than feedback, I wrote it down. At 11, he passed my desk and said loudly enough for nearby desks to hear, "Good to see some people understand what real commitment looks like." There were a few awkward laughs around the floor. I smiled politely and turned back to my screen. The moment he moved on, I added the comment to my log. Time, 11:04 a.m. Direct quote. At least 4 colleagues within earshot. I was building a real-time record. Clean, specific, time-stamped. Every word he said was material now. He just didn't know it yet.
Just after lunch, Brianna appeared at the edge of my desk. She was a project analyst who had been with the firm 2 years longer than me. We had worked on 3 accounts together, but were never particularly close. She was quiet by nature, the kind of person who watched more than she spoke. She leaned in and lowered her voice. "I heard what happened," she said, "about your mom. I'm really sorry." I nodded and thanked her. She didn't move. She glanced towards Mr. Colton's office, then back at me. He did this to Marcus 2 years ago. Same thing, different person, same playbook. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and placed her phone flat on my desk, screen up. She pressed play. A voice recording. 4 minutes and 22 seconds of Mr. Colton in this building, telling a crying employee that personal circumstances were not his problem to manage. The date on the file was 8 months ago. I looked at Brianna. "I've been waiting," she said quietly. "Waiting for someone who wouldn't just leave. Someone who would actually do something." She picked up her phone and slid it back into her pocket. "I have 3 more," she said. "You tell me when you're ready." She walked back to her desk. I sat very still for a long moment. I had just gotten bigger than I thought. That evening, I sat in my car in the parking garage for over 40 minutes and did not drive home. I had my laptop open on the passenger seat. I searched Mr. Colton's name on a professional review site, then scrolled through comment sections on the firm's public pages. The patterns were quiet but consistent. Former employees used phrases like high-pressure environment and no regard for personal circumstances. One described being told to cancel a medical appointment or miss a key deadline. Another mentioned a sudden exit after a personal situation was flagged. None of them named him directly, but every description matched the same person. The same approach, the same pressure, the same outcome. People eventually leaving broken. I went further back. I found a post from 3 years ago by a former team lead named Nate, who had written a pointed piece about workplace ethics shortly after resigning. I sent him a connection request with a brief message, just enough to say I was a current employee who would appreciate a conversation. By the time I drove home, I had a list of 7 former employees to contact. Brianna had 3 more recordings. I had 70 documents. And this was no longer just about me. Mr. Colton had been doing this for years. The next morning, I went back through something I had not looked at closely since my first week at the firm. The employee handbook. It was 43 pages long and lived on the internal HR portal. Most people ignored it after orientation.
I had ignored it too, for 4 years, because I had always assumed the rules were whatever Mr. Colton said they were. I was wrong. Page 18, under leave entitlements, I found it. Bereavement leave policy. In the event of the death of an immediate family member, which clearly listed parents, employees were entitled to 3 consecutive paid days off. No approval required from direct management. The request simply needed to be submitted to HR through the internal portal. I read it 4 times. Mr. Colton had not just been harsh. He had told me I would lose my job if I took leave the company itself had already guaranteed me. Leave that required no permission from him at all. He had violated company policy, clearly, in writing, in front of a witness. Me. I screenshotted the policy page and saved it. Then I printed a copy and locked it in my home desk drawer, alongside everything else I had gathered. The file was growing thicker every day, and Mr. Colton had no idea it existed.
I had to be careful about this part. Illinois is a 2-party consent state, which means you generally cannot record a private conversation without the other person knowing. I had read 3 separate legal explanations just to be certain. But there were exceptions, and the lawyer I planned to speak to later that week would confirm exactly what I could and could not do. In the meantime, I focused on what was already available to me without legal complications. Mr. Colton was not a subtle man. He conducted most of his threatening conversations through email and messaging platforms, which already left a clear trail. But he was also someone who made pointed comments in open spaces, the hallway, the break room, during all staff updates, where no private recording rules applied. I began keeping my phone in my breast pocket during those moments, volume low, recording app open. On Wednesday, he said in the break room in front of 4 colleagues, "Some of us don't have the luxury of family emergencies." He was looking at me when he said it. My phone was already in my pocket. I pressed record before he finished the sentence. 37 seconds. His voice, completely clear. That was the first one. Brianna already had more. And now, so did I. That evening, I pulled up Mr. Colton's LinkedIn profile and looked at it for a long time. His headline read, "People First Leader, Building High-Performance Teams Through Trust and Accountability." He had over 400 connections. He had a featured post about employee wellness, where he wrote about the importance of protecting your team's well-being. 23 comments. Most agreed enthusiastically. I scrolled through every post he had made in the past 2 years. He shared articles about compassionate leadership. He celebrated his team during company milestones. He posted a photo from a volunteer day with a warm caption about community and values. Then I opened my evidence folder in a second window and placed it side by side with his profile. On one screen, a man who publicly built his identity around caring for people. On the other, documented proof of a man who told a grieving employee to keep working or get out. A man who had done the same to others before her. A man who used public praise as a control tool and fear as a management style. The contrast between those 2 windows was not small. It was a weapon. And I was beginning to understand precisely how to use it. On Thursday morning, Paula stopped by my desk before the official start of the workday. Paula was a senior analyst. She had been at the firm for 7 years, one of the longest-serving employees on our floor.
She was respected, thorough, and not the type to approach someone without a clear reason. She pulled up a chair and sat down across from me. "I want to help," she said, simply, no preamble. I looked at her carefully. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, I was planning my wedding, she said. Mr. Colton told me the timeline was inconvenient for the team. He said if I took more than 1 day off during the planning period, I would be passed over for the promotion I was in line for. She folded her hands on the desk. I postponed the wedding by 8 months. My relationship almost didn't survive it. I didn't say anything. "I should have spoken up then," she said. "I didn't. I'm speaking up now." I told her what I was putting together. I didn't share every detail, but I gave her enough of the picture. She nodded slowly. "I'll write a formal account of what happened to me," she said. "Officially, if that's what it takes." It would be.
The service for my mother was on Friday at 11 o'clock. I was in a conference room at 11 o'clock. Diane had set up a video call for family members who couldn't attend in person. I had my phone propped against the inside of my notebook, screen angled low. The room smelled like dry erase markers and stale coffee. On the screen, I watched my mother's casket. Pale cream, small white flowers along the handles. She had chosen it herself 2 years ago, while she still could. Then Diane unfolded a piece of paper. She said it was a note my mother had written. For me. She read only the last 2 lines out loud. "Tell Emily she was never second. Tell her I knew exactly what she was carrying." I stood up and walked to the bathroom at the end of the hall. I stood in a stall with the door locked and my back against the cold metal, and I let myself cry. Really cry. The kind you can only do alone, that you had been holding back for 3 full days. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Then I dried my face, straightened my dress, and walked back to the conference room. I sat down. I reopened my laptop. Whatever hesitation had...
The following Monday, Mr. Colton held the weekly team meeting. He stood at the front the way he always did, hands in his pockets, posture easy, like a man who had never once doubted his own version of events. He went through the Harwick update, then shifted to what he called performance highlights. He looked directly at me. "Emily showed real dedication during a difficult period this week," he said. "I'd actually love for you to say a word to the team about commitment, about showing up when it matters." He was smiling. I stood up. "I learned something important this week," I said, "about what it really means to show up, about doing work that others can't see, about staying in a room when everything in you wants to leave." I paused. "I hope all of us remember. The people in this building see more than we think they do." I sat down. 23 colleagues were looking at me. 4 of them, Brianna, Paula, and 2 others I had spoken to separately, understood exactly what I had just said. Mr. Colton nodded approvingly. He had no idea those words were not about him. My phone was recording in my pocket. Public statement. His invitation on record. My response on record. It was perfect. On Tuesday of the following week, I sat across from an employment lawyer named Miss Adler. She was calm, organized, and asked questions the way a doctor asks about symptoms, without judgment, only precision. I placed my printed folder on her desk,
along with screenshots and a USB drive containing every digital file I had gathered. She also listened to 37 seconds of Mr. Colton's voice in a break room. She read in silence for almost 20 minutes. Then she looked up. "This is more than a policy violation," she said. "Denying bereavement leave clearly written into the company's own handbook, accompanied by a direct termination threat, constitutes an unlawful employment action in Illinois." She placed the folder down. "The public statements, the recorded audio, the documented pattern across multiple employees, the corroborating witnesses. This is a strong case." She paused. "You also have supplementary recordings from a colleague?" I nodded. "I'd like those analyzed before we file," she said. She laid out my options clearly: a formal internal complaint, an external complaint with the state labor board, and, depending on the company's response, a potential civil claim. She told me to keep gathering and not to confront him directly without documentation first. I thanked her and drove home. For the first time in weeks, I breathed fully. I submitted the formal bereavement leave request through the HR portal the next morning. Time-stamped, official, routed directly to HR, bypassing Mr. Colton entirely. By 10:15, he appeared at my desk. But he did not lower his voice. "What exactly is this HR request?" he said, louder than necessary. 3 desks around us went quiet. "It's for the bereavement leave in the employee handbook," I said calmly. 3 paid days. Loss of a parent. "I told you." "I know what you told me," I said. "I submitted it anyway." He stepped closer. His jaw was tight. "You think you're being smart. You're not. If you push this, you will not like how this ends." I looked at him steadily. "HR already received a copy of my documentation this morning," I said, "along with an external inquiry." The color in his face shifted. For the first time since I had worked under him, 4 years, hundreds of interactions, Mr. Colton did not have a next sentence. He had come to my desk to remind me who had the power. And I had shown him, quietly, in front of everyone close enough to hear, that the answer had changed. My phone was recording in my pocket. Every word of it. I filed the formal complaint that evening from my kitchen table. There were 2 submissions. The first went to the firm's internal HR portal, addressed to the head of human resources. I attached every document in my folder: the emails, the messaging records, the timesheets, the handbook policy screenshot, the written account Paula had prepared, statements from Nate and 2 other former employees, and Brianna's 4 audio recordings, which she had officially signed over to me in writing that afternoon. The second submission went to the Illinois Department of Labor. It documented the unlawful denial of bereavement leave and the termination threat that accompanied it. I attached the same files and included a clear, dated account of every relevant interaction. Both submissions were confirmed with case numbers within the hour. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't mention it to Diane, who was still managing things back home in Ohio. I closed my laptop, made a cup of tea, and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet. The apartment was still. The street outside was dark. Somewhere across the city, Mr. Colton was probably reviewing a client file or checking his notifications. He had no idea that the ground had already shifted beneath him. Thursday morning started like any other. I came in at 8, made my coffee, and logged on. By 8:40, two people I had never seen before walked through the front entrance. A man in a navy suit and a woman with a leather folder under her arm. They went directly to the reception desk and spoke in quiet voices. Within minutes, our HR director, Miss Gould, appeared from the back office. She greeted the two visitors, and together, the three of them walked toward the conference rooms at the far end of the floor. The air in the office shifted immediately. People who had been typing slowed down. Side glances crossed the floor. Someone near the window stood up slightly for a better look, then sat back down. Mr. Colton came out of his office at 9:15. He scanned the floor. His expression was different from any I had seen before. Not the steady, controlled look he usually wore, but something tighter, something searching. He walked to Miss Gould's office. The blinds closed. He stayed inside for 22 minutes. When he came back out, he went directly into his own office and pulled down the internal shade on his glass wall, the shade he almost never used. The investigation had officially begun. By that afternoon, something had changed on the floor. I noticed it first in the break room. A conversation stopped the moment Mr. Colton walked past, then resumed the second he was gone. Two people from the accounts team, who had never seemed particularly close, were sitting at a corner table, speaking quietly. One of them caught my eye when I walked in. She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. Miss Gould called people in one by one throughout the day. Short meetings, maybe 15 minutes each. Nobody discussed them openly, but I could tell from the way people came back to their desks that they had been asked something that mattered. Brianna came back from her meeting looking like she had finally set something heavy down. Paula returned and went straight to her desk without speaking to anyone, but she caught my eye as she sat down and gave me one small, steady nod. By the following day, the dam had broken. 4 colleagues submitted written statements to HR, then 5, then 7. Stories about canceled personal time, about comments made in front of clients, about the way Mr. Colton made people feel like their lives outside the office were an inconvenience he was graciously tolerating. He was not untouchable anymore. He called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. I told Paula where I was going, phone recording. Then I knocked. He started with guilt. He said he had protected my position when others questioned my output, that everything he had done was meant to push me toward a higher standard. Then he moved to pressure. Employees who create friction in this kind of environment rarely come out ahead, he said. Then he leaned forward and said, "You should think carefully about what you're doing." I looked at him steadily and said nothing. Something shifted in his face. He stood up, abruptly, his chair rolling back. His voice rose without him seeming to mean it to. "I made you," he said. "Everything you know about surviving in this industry, I gave you that, and this is what you do with it?" His voice bounced off the glass wall. I saw a figure slow in the hallway outside. Then another. He caught himself. He sat back down, pulled his jacket straight. But it was too late. He had just raised his voice at me in his glass-walled office in the middle of a floor full of people who were currently cooperating with an investigation into his conduct. "Thank you for your time," I said. And I walked out. The following Monday, I arrived at work to find the floor different from anything I had known in 4 years. At 9:15, Ms. Gould appeared at the entrance to Mr. Colton's office. She was accompanied by the man in the navy suit. He carried a printed document. They knocked once and went inside. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. When the door opened, Mr. Colton came out carrying nothing. No jacket, no phone, no folder. Just the same man who had told me 4 years of late nights wasn't enough, wearing the same dark gray blazer, walking across the floor toward the elevator like someone who had forgotten how. He passed my desk. I did not look away.
He stopped, just half a second. His eyes found mine, and I saw something there I had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, just the plain, stripped-down look of a man who finally understood that the woman he had smirked at 2 weeks ago in a black dress had been 2 steps ahead of him the entire time. He kept walking. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. They closed. Ms. Gould sent the firm-wide email at 9:35. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Ongoing investigation. I read it once. Then I went back to work.
The investigation results came 3 weeks later. Miss Gould called me into her office on a Tuesday morning and closed the door. She sat across from me with a folder and the careful expression of someone about to confirm something serious. The findings were clear. Mr. Colton had violated the firm's bereavement leave policy. He had violated the firm's conduct policy on at least 4 documented occasions across multiple employees. His statements constituted unlawful intimidation under the firm's employment agreement. And his behavior had created a pattern of sustained pressure that the external auditors classified as a hostile work environment. He was terminated, effective immediately. The firm issued a formal written apology to me. They acknowledged that the denial of my bereavement leave had been unlawful and contrary to policy. They confirmed my 3 paid days retroactively. They offered a financial settlement for the harm caused, which Miss Adler helped me negotiate to a fair figure. 2 company-wide policy changes were announced within the week. Leave requests were removed from direct manager approval. A new reporting structure meant HR complaints could be made without going through an immediate supervisor first. I sat in the elevator on the way back to my floor and let the numbers tick past. His reputation had collapsed overnight. Every word of it earned. 2 weeks after the investigation closed, I sat at my desk one final time and wrote my resignation letter. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first gave my 2 weeks' notice. The second thanked the colleagues who had stepped forward, Brianna, Paula, and every person who had written a statement when it would have been easier to stay quiet. The third noted I was proud of the policy changes and hoped they would protect every person who came through that firm after me. I did not mention Mr. Colton by name. He didn't deserve that kind of space in my goodbye. I had already spoken to 2 other firms. One reached out directly. Professional reputation moves faster and farther than fear does. There was an offer waiting. A senior coordinator role with stronger pay, a structured leave policy, and a hiring manager who had sent a warm welcome message before I even formally accepted. I printed the letter. I handed it to Miss Gould. She read it, looked up, and said, "We're genuinely sorry to lose you, Emily.
I told her I was genuinely glad to be going. Paula walked me to the elevator at the end of my last day. She hugged me, quiet and solid. She didn't need to say much. The doors closed. I looked at my reflection in the metal panel. I looked like someone who had just won something real.
I walked out of that building for the last time on a Wednesday afternoon in November. The air was cold, the way Chicago always is before winter settles in. Sharp, clean, and honest. I stood on the pavement with my box of desk things and stayed still for a moment, long enough to feel it fully. I thought about that Friday morning 2 weeks after my mother died. The way I had walked through the front door dressed in black, and Mr. Colton had stood by the printer and smiled. He had watched me walk to my desk, and he had believed, completely, that I was showing up for him. He was the kind of man who assumed that showing up meant surrender, that walking through a door meant you accepted whatever waited on the other side.
He never considered that a person could walk into a room with her own reasons entirely, that she could be present and somewhere else at the same time, that she could sit right in front of him, answering his emails, attending his meetings, smiling at exactly the right moments, and be building the very thing that would take him down, one time-stamped document at a time. I put my box in the car. I called Diane. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Mom would have loved this," she said softly. I looked through the windshield at the building I was never going back into. "I know," I said. I showed up for her. I started the car and drove away.